Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Here we are for part 9 of the fourth way. Non-identification. The idea of non-identifying carries with it a depth of meaning that needs to be explored thoroughly in order to avoid misunderstanding. It can be found in other ideas related to spiritual evolution, such as detachment, freedom from desire, inner peace. The results of this effort are seen in the presence of sages and saints in all times and places. Non-identification is ultimately self-transcendence. It requires us to overcome a fundamental self-interest that guides everyone's lives in order to accept passing circumstances, in order to remember the greater context in which our lives are taking place. We must become liberated from all that is connected with the selfishness with which we are born. This condition is part of our natural makeup, as basic to us as the instinct to survive. The paradox is that spiritual and psychological survival requires the opposite. The maturing of the human character means turning one's attention to something greater than oneself. We all know people who have completely crystallized in the state of identification. It is a tragic dead end that brings despair and solitude in its wake. Such persons equate the state of identification with their identity. Their negativity, their reactions from false personality are how they know themselves. They are not aware of other options. This work reveals that, in fact, we do have other options of behavior. To be identified means that we literally lose ourselves, lose our identity in that with which we are identified. A new car gets a dent in it, and we have an angry reaction. We become the dent in the car. This is our reality. There is no sense of self unaffected by this external event. To remember that self, which is the opposite of identification, suggests that we are present to this moment of our lives, and it links to the rest of our existence. We are the child that we once were, the youth of all our life experience that we have acquired on this journey through time and space. This remembrance creates a density that is not dragged down or fragmented by the passing event with which we would have otherwise be identified. To be in a state of non-identification is a condition in which we find in everyone around us and in which we live and breathe and have our being. It is a total waste of life force. It is imagination, self-indulgence, pettiness, unreality. The serenity that is witnessed in the sages and the saints of the past is not meant to be in some way rare or unique nobility of character. It is right alignment with reality. It is an achievable state for all of us. This work takes us there step by step if we make persistent, right efforts. Non-identification has nothing to do with the disconnection of the emotional center, lack of compassion, or interest in what is going on around us. In fact, to be non-identified gives one the widest scope of vision and makes possible a new awareness. Non-identification pulls us out of our black hole of distorted self-interest, which gives us tunnel vision and keeps our psychology in the basement of its potential. It is very difficult work, as anyone will quickly discover upon making efforts to overcome identification. It demands moment by moment remembrance of work ideas, of one's higher aims, and a constant return to inner separation from our automatic reactions and the tyranny of false personality and its infinite variety of self-gratifying desires. Finally, non-identification requires the capacity to adapt necessary suffering, a fact that everyone must deal with in one way or another. To experience inner pain without falling victim to negativity, including self-pity, or becoming completely unbalanced by a surfacing of the emotion center as the only perspective on reality, and is a sign of new maturity of will and understanding. At the apex of this level of being is the ability to find joy and gratitude for the gift of life, even in the face of great turmoil, injustice, or tragedy. Living in that paradox creates a new quality of self which transcends the ever-shifting scenery of temporal life. It is the groundwork of unity, constancy, and independence. On mysticism and the intellect. Meister Eckhart's understanding of the use of the intellect on the path of transformation had an extraordinary modern understanding of the nature of being and of human psychology. He saw us as fragmented and separated from our source of origin, with an irrepressible orientation towards our spiritual nature, but he provided no dogma as signposts on the way. He considered it better to say what God is not, rather than what God is. He believed that each had to find his or her path to the Godhead within, and that this search could take place anywhere. In simplest terms, he believed that God is immediately present to us, and that through the abandonment of our lower selves and their world of multiplicity, we can be filled with the external illumination of the unmediated, inexpressible Godhead. He hints at this view of reality when he states that God expects the soul to progress to that point where it may receive much. Progress is therefore equated with knowing, a knowing which is not based on empirical observation or rational comprehension, but rather on an inner, higher level of consciousness which transcends this material world. Meister Eckhart considers the intellect as the element in us which opens onto higher spiritual spheres. This perception makes of it far more than the workings of the reasoning mind. The intellect is the agent within the soul which is perfectly sensitive to God, because it is of God's order and not made from nature. Awareness of reality comes through the development of transformation of this agent into God. The consciousness of the nearness of God reveals for Eckhart that all reality depends on the invisible and immanent reality of the divine.
My being depends on God's intimate presence.
The soul's knowledge of God is hindered by time and space, because their multiplicity veils the unity from which everything comes.
If I am to know true being, I must know where it is being itself, and that is in God, and not where it is divided amongst creatures.
Knowing God outside of time and space means knowing God in his fullness, in his purity. For Eckhart, this is the kingdom of God, the state of being in which all creation is known in its essence, the origin and home of the soul. The ascent of the soul to the kingdom of God is an inward journey.
God is within, we are without.
The outer physical realm can only distract the soul in a way that is best expressed by Augustine's two loves, i.e., the mistaken preference of love of the creation over love of the Creator. Eckhart asserts that if sticks and stones knew God in his immanent presence, they would be as blessed as angels. He suggests that the only true difference between a stick and a human being is precisely in this matter of knowing God's nearness. This consciousness is not a matter of instruction, but of inner experience or recognition. When the kingdom appears to the soul, and it is recognized, there is no further need for preaching or instruction. The consciousness of God excludes the consciousness of oneself until one finds oneself again in God. Here, Eckhart is suggesting a merger with the divine, when no medium separates the soul from the Godhead. The intellect must have no existence of its own in order to be filled with the only true existence. This insight assumes the absorption of the lower into the higher, in which the lower is utterly consumed. The lower actually becomes the higher. This is how Eckhart understands the fullness of our joy. As with wood and fire, we too can enter into a higher form and glow with the very glow of holiness itself. This is the birth of the sun in the soul, the unmediated first emanation of the Godhead in an individual. Eckhart takes the Neoplatonic return theme and carries it beyond rest in God or vision of God into an actual oneness in which there is no distinction whatsoever. He presupposes that everything is divine in its ground, that the soul has a spark of uncreated light at its core, and that the total emptying or abandonment of the self results in the soul's penetration into the naked Godhead itself, the source of all being. Multiplicity, restlessness, changeability cease only when there is no more becoming. As with the pain of physical birth, there is initially
a painful unlikeness that resists change.
The Wisdom of the Fourth Way by Theodore J. Nottingham. Some answers to questions. Student. Gurdjieff said, in search of the miraculous, that connection with the larger accumulator can only come through the emotional center. The other three centers feed only onto the small accumulators. Therefore, the aim must be on the development of the emotional center. Naturally, no further instructions are given. My question, other than to refuse indulgence of negative emotion, what way may one do in a positive manner to connect with the large accumulator? Is it effort? And if so, of what kind? I find the text somewhat nebulous on this point, as I do others. Theodore. The above quote from Gurdjieff is a critical clue for those who seek to evolve. He's telling us that a key breakthrough toward transformation comes from the emotional center. In our stimulus response behavior, the emotional center is primarily made of negative energy, like and dislike, crowd emotion, instinctive, moving story of the emotional center, and so forth. Yet its potential is to be an instrument of cognition. Through intelligent emotion comes intuitive knowing, conscience, remorse, awareness of our responsibility to the universe, and other qualities of awareness that cannot be easily put into words. The reference to the large accumulator is merely a technical term for tapping into more high voltage, refined energy than that with which we normally operate. But we do not work on the emotional center in order to tap into the large accumulator. It is the result of the right use of the emotions. In those moments, we can detect another quality of energy circulating within us. This is not the aim, but the byproduct. For instance, you can verify that an act of self-transcendent kindness towards another person or an effort of real forgiveness will generate another kind of energy within you. That is the least of the issues involved here. The work is not about energy, but about becoming. The other question is the more important one. The positive uses of emotion. Work on negative emotions must occur because we are so soiled and rendered opaque by this constant misuse of emotional energy. If we seek any significant change, we must perform these efforts of undoing wrong work, which is almost a permanent condition for many people. Work on positive emotion is also important because it introduces us to the potential of higher states. For example, making the effort to not identify will produce a subtle emotional quality which can be defined as positive. Or seeing beauty, such as the autumn leaves, without interference by the ups and downs of our circumstances, but being present to that grander reality brings forth positive emotion. External considering, giving no thought to oneself, but caring for the needs of another, is another key way of working on positive emotion. Making the effort to not expose oneself to the toxic stimuli that are all around us, media and so forth, which often grants negative emotion, leaves energy available for work on positive emotion. Learning to accept what is and finding a certain contentment in being present in that moment generates positive emotion. Being freed from self-absorption, enough to sense the state of others and perceive what is needed for right action in specific circumstances, is another form of positive emotion. Intentionally feeding one's higher emotions, quiet reading versus watching a football game, helps to develop positive emotions. After a while, one will want to live there as much as possible and leave behind the chaos, self-indulgence and unpleasantness of the misuse of the emotional center. The sense of one's connection with a vaster life and gratitude for being alive and a witness to the phenomenon of conscious existence in the universe generates positive emotion. Perhaps you could see that all of these approaches tie into the state of self-remembering, for which positive emotion is fundamental. You will also note that divided attention, knowing what is going on within oneself, getting to know one's nature, must be done in a way that paradoxically frees us from this self-absorption. This liberation from pettiness and sleep opens onto a greater reality that is the primary path towards positive emotion. This path can lead to profound spiritual experience, which each must find for themselves. Student. Court proceedings resulted in the most unjust, draconian solution imaginable for a client. During the proceeding, I sought to observe myself, remember myself. Things have changed inside. It does not seem like the end of the world. The clients are apoplectic. Life is school. Theodore Nottingham. You can also observe, in the case to which you refer, that your being attracts your life. That the energy of life driving everything is negativity. The law of accident, mechanics, producing predictable responses. Everyone's total identification with every event and therefore complete lack of relativity, or sleep. Injustice exists because of sleep. There is another level of being that includes an increased perspective and understanding born of effort and experience in the work. It includes relativity, compassion, and acceptance. Its nature is not that of self-interest, and consequently it is liberated and can be objective, clear, and unidentified seeing. Such seeing is not emotionally dead or repressed, but serene and wise. This is what is created through doing this inner work. The psychological practices and ideas gradually clear away all the wrong work of mechanical psychology, the lies and dirt of negativity in all its forms, self-interest, vanity, inner considering, pictures of oneself, lying, pride, and everything else the work tells us to observe. This process strips the personality, or the ego, and leaves one feeling vulnerable, and rather without a real personality to replace the dying false personality, one becomes withdrawn. This is a critical stage in the work. What this emptiness should create in you is humility, not self-condemnation, but self-transcendence and real self-remembering. Humility expands understanding, which begets meaning. A new self is born with observing eye. It is the real self and will grow stronger and become more present with the continued practice of self-observation. With the practical work and verifying experience, one's awareness expands. Continuing sincere efforts can expand one's consciousness permanently. But what you sacrifice to reach this point is all that you believe yourself to be and all interest in seeking personal gratification. Not everyone is willing to pay such a high price. Those who are courageous enough to continue will find valuation of the work to be the only third force needed. Therefore, the new faculty in one's psychology, that of developing consciousness, is fed by the power of right valuation. The path of evolution is upward towards illumination, through the sight of understanding, toward finer and finer energies that cannot support the weight of violence. This path leads away from the automatic animal level of being towards enlightened intentionality. Student, what does the taste of realization feel like? Theodore, assuming that by the taste of realization you are referring to the presence of awakened consciousness, also known as self-remembering, the taste is familiar. This taste feels as though one is seeing everything from a higher perspective, which includes a broader vista. Connections are seen that cannot be recognized from a lower level. It feels like unified, undifferentiated, utterly unique, serene selfhood. One does experience something of that peace which passes all understanding. The reason it is beyond understanding is that such a state of serenity occurs despite paradoxical circumstances. It makes no sense in the reality of the second state of consciousness. This state includes acceptance, serenity, humility, resolution of paradoxes, sometimes deep joy and gratitude. It comes to us as both a gift and a result of our efforts. One feels as valuable as any other creation in the universe, and as transient. One feels intuitively connected with all of life. One's sense of identity shifts, and a truer, purer quality of self replaces the narrow, identified second state. A sense of harmony arises from this new perspective and understanding. This experience can form a permanent faculty in one's psychology where that consciousness is present. The work calls it an organ of perception, formed by understanding, grown in being, illumination. That level of consciousness is available not only ahead of us in time, but above us in time now. The self-evolution of the figures in the Fourth Way literature undoubtedly possess that faculty, which nevertheless does not eliminate the reality of continued effort. This is why their comments are most often focused on the difficulties of achieving change. But at some point, for those who persist, there are breakthroughs, and one begins to be able to do, which also means being able to do. Results are not only possible, but verifiably achievable. However, the great mass of humanity and of seekers does not wish to awaken. An important development along this path is to notice that we live in different states of consciousness. This is not as obvious as it sounds. I'm not referring here to moments of happiness in contrast to times of depression, but to a state of being that puts us in touch with a deeper reality. Perhaps you have had moments of experiencing such liberation that comes from these higher states of being, moments of great joy, or gratitude for being alive, or while standing before a scene of great beauty. Moments when our awareness is lifted beyond the knots and tensions of our worries and concerns, and we are free to enjoy the experience of being here and now and happy to be alive. These are higher states of being. You may have had such experiences as children when we were less weighed down by the things that now preoccupy us. And maybe you think that those times of bliss and wonder are gone forever, along with the other delights of childhood. But that is not the case. We are meant to dwell permanently in this habitat of the soul, where higher consciousness dwells. It is possible to taste and live this joy and freedom, this inner awakening, even during rush hour, even at the office, even when circumstances around you are difficult. Let's take a look at our everyday state of consciousness. Teachings on this subject describe our usual condition of consciousness as a state of sleep. Though we all believe that we are fully conscious in every moment of our lives, the fact is that most of our existence is spent on automatic. We are stimulus response organisms. Something happens to us and we react. We think we choose how we behave, but most often we are simply one giant knee-jerk reaction to whatever comes our way. Your child disobeys you and you get angry. You spill a drink on yourself and you're embarrassed. The red light lasts too long and you're impatient. The list is endless from morning till night. This is the world of stress, of ups and downs, of good days and bad days, of insecurity, inconsistency, unreliability. This is the world we know so well. If you think the word sleep is a strange way to describe our condition, just think back on the last time you observed somebody watching TV. The vacant stare, the loose jaw. We are virtually hypnotized by life around us, drawn out of ourselves and no more capable to make choices than when we're in the middle of a dream. Things happen and we respond according to our programming. It's all consuming. Our first obstacle is therefore our wrong perspective on our lives. We take ourselves for granted. We think we know who we are. We believe that we are one and the same person all the time. But take a closer look and dare to be honest with yourself. When you're really hungry, the you that is hungry is in charge. When you're irritable, the you that is irritated is the boss. When you're tired, when you're excited, when you're mad, each mood and desire is in control. Where is the unity of oneself in all that? Again, we function in a stimulus-response manner that takes away our capacity to be unified as individuals. We can't count on ourselves to be the same person from one moment to the next. The person who decides the night before to get up early in the morning is not the person who has to turn off the alarm and roll out of bed. That person has a very different idea of what he or she wants to do. To make matters worse, each of these impulses that claims to be the whole person is separated by blinders. They do not know each other. When we are our happy-go-lucky selves, we don't remember the mean-tempered one. Our condition of multiplicity is further complicated by the fact that we live so much of our life in imagination. Consider how much time is spent worrying about the future or fretting over the past. Think of all the daydreaming that goes on in your head, and look how we bounce from one thought to the next without any intentionality or purpose. Someone mentions a word, like blue, and our mind takes us off on a tangent that gets more and more tangled until we no longer have any idea how we got to a certain mood or idea. So, in our ordinary state of consciousness, we are made of many disconnected selves. We are pulled to and fro by imagination and unintentional thoughts, and yet we think we are in full control of ourselves. Now we come to an even more fundamental problem. Our essential nature. That which we truly are. The sensitivities, the gifts, the inclinations we were born with. It is generally repressed at an early stage of our life. As we encounter the world around us, the essence of who we are becomes covered over by the development of our personality. Here again, we take for granted that our personality is who we truly are. But our personality is rarely related to our essence and our natural inclinations. Throughout our protein adolescence and early adult years, we have both consciously and unconsciously built up defense mechanisms to survive the pain of dealing with life. We have developed masks to protect ourselves or to manipulate others. Furthermore, we have absorbed into our idea of ourselves the images that our culture tells us are the acceptable way of being a man or a woman. We have accumulated the imitations of our parents, our peers, and our environment. In a word, we have covered over our essential nature to such an extent that we have to virtually undertake an archaeological exploration in order to rediscover ourselves, in order to find the habitat of our soul. In order to live right, we have to be aligned with our real self. But there are powerful forces in the way. The greatest among them is negativity in all its forms. Irritation, anger, impatience, depression, hatred, vengeance, jealousy, envy, and resentment. These are all poisons within us that cause us so much unnecessary suffering and use up so much of our energy, our life force. We can't have to live like that. Even though it seems that everyone around us indulges in these negative forms of behavior, they are not the only way to live. Imagine how different your life would be without the constant stress of those wretched feelings. But that entails dealing with our greatest foe, our vanity. Vanity is not merely primping in the mirror. It causes us to spend much of our life in self-interested activity, in thinking about ourselves, in having to be right, in asserting ourselves over others, in stubbing our pride over this or that. Vanity causes us to have a false idea of ourselves and a false sense of self-importance, along with a perverse distortion of our attention. Everything becomes me, me, me. So much grief and misery comes from this petty self-centeredness that disfigures our humanity. We are our own greatest source of suffering as long as we live in this state of sleep that is ruled by automatic behavior, a self-centered focus, negative emotions, multiple selves vying for control, and misperceptions of who we truly are. So what is the true self found in higher states? It is the life force beyond our mistaken notion of ourselves that is seeking to come through us and accomplish its work of goodness in this world. It is that mysterious presence that can overcome solitude, meaninglessness, and despair. Moreover, not only is it always there, deep within, but it is seeking us more than we are seeking it. Student. I've tried to keep watch and take note of the shifting eyes and that shape-shifting person behind them. This, I think, is valuable from an observing point of view, but then may no more be than a sleepy little cataloguing activity and ends up giving the phantom selves a credence that they do not deserve. Theodore. Observing multiplicity is valuable information. Whether any work practice becomes formatory or authentic depends entirely on the sincerity and effort of the student. It can become formatory cataloguing, but it needn't. It can, over time, recognize recurring eyes and groups of eyes. In seeing their repetitiveness, one can feel less identified, knowing that it is mechanical behavior, knowing that a particular group of eyes always leads to a particular psychological state that needs to be avoided for the sake of this work. There is a wealth of knowledge to be gained by observing one's own multiplicity, including a state of what is behind all of that shifting sand of personalities. Seeing the continuous activity of changing eyes, you begin to have a sense of what is seeing this activity, and consequently develop a stronger sense of separation from the multiplicity. At some point, you will be able to decide which eyes to give your attention to and which eyes to disempower. In truth, we must see that level of changing eyes as a veneer that must be removed so that something more permanent and stable can be present. Student. To verify, see, feel that there are many eyes, I must be able to hold together to very different eyes. It does not need to be so complicated or strange. Opposite eyes and contradictory eyes are self-evident. There is a me who wants to study a subject intensively, and a me who wants to lay down on the couch and watch television. One who sets the aim of getting up early in the morning, and one who wakes up to the alarm and hates the idea of getting up. It will help for you to perceive the appearance of different centers, intellectual, emotional, instinctive, and moving, as they vie for temporary control and satisfaction of their desires. The non-involvement and careful watching of observing eye will lift you out of the chaos of multiplicity and eventually anchor your sense of self outside of the hypnotizing power and attraction of the many eyes stimulated in us in countless ways. To me, this is a very big thing. When it happens, if at all, it burns akin to a feeling of deep shame, and I feel a disorientation. Theodore. Remorse of conscience is an important ingredient in our development. But as Rodney Collin astutely points out, once we have tasted it, we must move on. There is no value in wallowing in remorse. It is bitter, no doubt, but it can be a major third force for growing in this work. But But then when I actually try to apply the words, apparently nothing occurs and I'm discouraged. It is necessary to burn up the intruders who have taken up residence in this house, to hold them firmly in the light of consciousness, so that, through the light and contradictions, they are burned and destroyed. Theodore. The ancient ones of early Christianity taught that, in relation to intruding thoughts, we should be so vigilant that as soon as they show their heads, like a serpent appearing through a hole, we must cut it off. This is a potent use of the stop exercise, which is also meant to halt the entry and influence of eyes that seek to claim our identity. The more you live in a more quiet inner place, an inner sanctuary, where features cannot take over, the more you will see the difference between passing thoughts and feelings and your deeper self. It is subtle business, but most certainly can be achieved. Among other things, don't take yourself so seriously. Relax and try to live at a different pace. Find some silence between the notes. You're exhibiting several different kinds of wrong work. To begin with, multiplicity can be varied in the ununified nature of your many eyes. Right, I'm going to wrap this one up. I will be back again tomorrow with the next installment, which will be part 10. Thank you very much. Really hope you're enjoying this. I'm really enjoying this. Actually, I've got so much to say, and like I said, this is the first time I'm reading this. I'm reading it to you. I'm recording it as I'm reading it for the first time. Maybe I should have read through it first before recording it, but no, I want to experience this at the same time as you guys. So, I don't know what's to come. We're on page 255 and there's 722 pages, so we've still got quite a way to go. As I say, next part is part 10. Hope to see you there. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and I hope that you are making conscious efforts to actually apply some changes within your life, things that you can control that are helping you to feel much better about what is happening around you right now. Thank you very much for your time. Much love, guys. See you later.